A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. It was one of those sun-drenched Saturdays in May when everything seemed perfect for a celebration, the kind of day that whispered of new beginnings and the sweetness of life. My wife, Jenna, had spent weeks prepping for her baby shower, her excitement glowing in every corner of our home, from the pastel streamers that adorned the walls to the meticulously arranged table of treats that promised to entice the taste buds of our closest friends and family. I admired her enthusiasm as I bustled around, trying my best to help, albeit clumsily, while my mind was slightly occupied with worries of making everything go smoothly. However, beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect day lay the ripples of an impending conflict, namely my mother-in-law, Sylvia. She was that type of person who could suck all the joy out of a room with just a few careless comments, and I felt a tightening in my chest every time I thought of her arrival. You see, Sylvia and I had always struggled to understand each other. She had her ways, and I had mine, but today was about celebrating Jenna and our soon-to-arrive little one, and I was determined not to let her overshadow this important moment. When Sylvia finally walked through the door, the bright sunshine seemed to dim just a little as her presence filled the space with a sense of foreboding. Her eyes roamed the room, and it didn't take long for her to find something wrong. The tablecloth didn't match the theme, the cupcakes were too sweet, or perhaps, the baby blew a little too much air when I said it'd be appropriate to hand out pacifiers as favors. I could feel myself tense up with each comment that slipped from her lips, and while I was trying to support my wife, the tension was palpable. Then, 30 minutes into the festivities, the real disaster struck. Jenna was in the middle of a heartfelt speech, thanking everyone for their support, and suddenly Sylvia interrupted her in the most public of ways, launching into a tirade about how she believed that, according to family tradition, Jenna should be using a different name for the baby. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was not just a trivial issue, it was a special moment, and as I glanced at Jenna, her face fell, the excitement replaced with confusion and embarrassment. I felt a rush of protective anger surge through me. In that moment, all the pent-up frustration boiled to the surface. I stood up, my heart racing, and said in a voice that was steadier than I felt, "Sylvia, enough. This is not the time to bring that up." The room went silent, and I could feel everyone's eyes on us. Maybe I shouldn't have reacted so strongly, but seeing my wife's hurt face felt like a punch to the gut. I gestured toward the door, my voice firm. "If you can't be supportive, maybe you should step outside for a moment." I watched her face contort, the shock and disbelief evident, and for a split second, I questioned if I had crossed a line. Still, I remained resolute. Sylvia turned on her heel, storming out of the house with an offended huff, murmuring about how ungrateful we were. The aftermath was a swirl of emotions. Guests buzzed with a mix of surprise and awkward tension. Jenna looked crushed, and I felt a wave of guilt wash over me as I approached her, pulling her into a comforting embrace, wanting to reassure her that I only wanted to protect her happiness. To my relief, she surprised me by murmuring softly, "Thank you for standing up for me." It let a little light back into my heart, and as the celebrations continued, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Jenna's friends rallied around her, lifting her spirits with laughter and light-hearted games, and for a while, I allowed myself to revel in the moment, pushing aside the consequences of my earlier actions. But deep down, I wrestled with the thought of how I'd now probably solidified a rift between my wife and her mother. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and as an evening breeze drifted through our open windows, I felt torn between feeling protective of my wife and maintaining peace with Sylvia. In the days that followed, I found myself spiraling deeper into my thoughts. Sylvia called, demanding to talk, and I had to prepare myself for the confrontation that would follow. Surprisingly, when we sat down to speak, I was struck by her vulnerability. She opened up about feeling left out and the pressure of tradition weighing heavily on her shoulders. Through cautious conversation, I learned about her fears of losing her daughter to motherhood, a pain that resonated with me as I thought about my own parents' transition into grandparenthood. I realized I had acted out of impulse, but it didn't change the past. I still had a loving family that needed to find a compromise. Upon returning home, Jenna and I discussed the possibility of inviting her mother back over, trying to mend the torn fabric of our family before the baby arrived. And so it happened. A few weeks later, we hosted a small dinner, during which apologies were exchanged and an understanding was reached. Things certainly shifted, and they may not be ideal, but for now, we created harmony out of chaos, and I learned that sometimes, love requires a measure of patience and a willingness to listen. In retrospect, maybe I was the asshole for my instinctive reaction that day. Perhaps there were better ways to handle the situation without kicking my mother-in-law out. But I also didn't regret standing by my wife, fiercely protecting her in a moment of vulnerability. Family is messy, and though the road to reconciliation is ever evolving, I now know that sometimes you must navigate through the storm to reach the calm that follows. And every bit of our journey, the laughter, the tears, and the misunderstandings have taught us just how precious this new chapter in our lives truly is. As I sat on my bed that evening, shrouded in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, 1,000 thoughts swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. I had replayed that chaotic moment from the baby shower over and over like a broken record, searching for a sign that would confirm whether my instincts had led me right, or if I had truly crossed an unforgivable line. The laughter of our friends and family felt very distant now, fading like echoes in a cavern, replaced swiftly by the memory of my wife's tear-streaked face as she hurried into our bedroom to avoid any further conflict. She was carrying the weight of impending motherhood, stretched tight like a thin thread, and it had taken just a few careless words from her own mother to snap that thread. Seeing her heartache had ignited a fire within me, one that I wasn't sure I could contain. My mother-in-law's unfiltered comments blended with the uneasiness of the day, how she had seemed so determined to insert her perspectives on parenting, as if she was the one digging her heels into the ground while our lives were changing in uncharted ways, a territory that belonged to my wife and me alone. As the evening unfolded, I found solace in preparing a calming chamomile tea. The ritual seemed to slow time, allowing me to breathe in deeply and let the warm scent engulf me. I climbed into bed, the blankets cocooning me in a false sense of security while I waited for my wife to return. Minutes stretched, but just as I began to worry, I heard the softly creaking door hinge, a familiar sound that stirred a mix of anxiety and comfort. My wife, her dark hair tousled and eyes reflecting remnants of sorrow, slipped quietly into the room. She settled beside me, and at that moment, the world outside faded away. We sat in silence, the kind of silence that was both heavy and light, until she finally turned to me, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you really mean what you said?" The question hung in the air, and I felt my heart race, unsure of whether she was referring to my outburst at her mother, or my unending commitment to her. I rested my hand on her knee, wanting her to feel the certainty that buried deep within me, a promise of support and love. "I did," I replied, swallowing hard. "I would do anything to protect you, to give you the space you need to breathe and to enjoy this moment. I just wish it didn't have to turn out like that." Her eyes glistened as she listened, and before I knew it, she was leaning into me, softness enveloping the tension we had been navigating. "I don't think you're the asshole," she finally sighed, and with that, a weight lifted. We spent hours talking, recounting moments of laughter and joy shared with friends that day, allowing ourselves to drown out the negativity that had seeped in. It felt cathartic to process the situation as a team, dissecting my mother-in-law's motives and her unwavering beliefs regarding parenthood. In the days that followed, we tentatively re-established connections with family, recognizing that confrontation wouldn't mend the fragility of the relationships we had nurtured. I called my mother-in-law shortly after our heart-to-heart, a move that surprised even me. Over the phone, feelings bubbled to the surface, empathy and forgiveness teetered on the edge as my throat went dry with uncertainty. I told her my side, we both teetered around our truths, and even though her voice was laced with defensiveness, there were moments of understanding, like threads stitching together the rips in our bond. It was humbling to recognize that the older generation often has their own baggage, fears and regrets hidden behind open mouths, bursting at the seams during celebrations meant for joy. It wasn't easy to navigate those conversations, but every effort became a stepping stone toward healing. Gradually, we created a delicate truce. When the day of the baby's arrival came, weeks later, we stood together, hand in hand, in the delivery room, my wife exhibiting strength I had never witnessed. The moment she held our child for the first time, there were no words to describe the overwhelming rush of love and tenderness that enveloped us both. The air was heavy with realization. We weren't just welcoming a new member of our family, we were forging a deeper connection within our own little world, while learning how to coexist with those we hold dear, despite our differences. As we navigated through the chaos of new parenthood, family visits filled the days, and though at times, the air thickened with lingering tension, we remained vigilant, united in our commitment to each other's happiness. And perhaps that moment at the baby shower, messy as it had been, allowed us to find clarity in our approach to love, communication, and the intricate tapestry of family life. Months later, we embraced the chaotic beauty of parenthood, friends texting late into the night, laughter bouncing off the walls of our once quiet home. The lessons learned from that day remained etched in my heart. I no longer saw motherhood and family as simple constructs that existed in perfect harmony. No, It was a tumultuous sea that required navigating the waves of imperfections, one thoughtful action at a time. Looking back, I would never regret taking my wife's side that day, for it was in that instant I discovered the immeasurable depth of our love. And in the ebb and flow of family life, it became clear to me, as we rocked our newborn son to sleep, that it was well worth the storm I had waded through to find the calm that would follow. As the days turned into weeks following the baby shower incident, the emotional undertow still lingered, even amid the gentle joys of new parenthood. Our son, Caleb, brought enchanting smiles and moments of bliss I'd never foreseen, yet that single, charged moment with my mother-in-law felt like a weight clinging to my chest, an unwelcome cloud hovering over our sunlit days. My wife, Emma, had handled the fallout with such grace. She spoke to her mother multiple times, navigating an apology that I secretly hoped would bridge the gap in their relationship. Though I wanted so desperately to make things right, a quiet part of me felt that my actions were justified. Each time Emma picked up the phone to soothe her mother, I flashed back to that day, reliving my protective instincts, the icy chill of her words when she belittled Emma's fears about becoming a mother. It was uncharted territory for all of us. The little things that had once seemed minor began to feel monumental. As we decorated Caleb's nursery, laughing over colors and themes, I learned a lot about the fragile nature of our lives intertwining. Every department of parenting was steeped in endless questions, yet those moments forged bonds even tighter than I'd ever experienced. I remember specifically one evening, wrapped in a cozy blanket, Emma nursing Caleb while I sat close, watching them share an intimate world of their own. In those tranquil moments, I wiped away insecurities about my role as a father and husband. Those vibrant emotions painted love all around me. But it wasn't long before I could no longer ignore the changes in Emma's demeanor. I noticed the slight downturn of her mouth, the glances she threw towards her phone as if waiting for a message that never came. After a few days of deliberation, I finally asked her if she wanted to reach out to her mother again. Emma sighed, her brow wrinkling as if I'd pressed on a still fresh bruise. "I wish things were different," she finally said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want a rift between us. She was always someone I leaned on." Her admission hung in the air, light but heavy with meaning. I wanted to heal the fracture that my reaction had caused, yet I also grieved for the rift I had helped create, feeling like I had been cast into the rolling waves without a life preserver. Gradually, I came to appreciate that even when we feared failure or confrontation, the need to confront uncomfortable truths was indeed the path toward resolution. One day, I encouraged Emma to write a letter to her mother, to express her feelings as authentically as she could without the pressure of a direct conversation that might stir the tide once more. It seemed therapeutic, piecing together thoughts that had flitted away amidst the chaos of emotions. Watching her pour her heart into that letter ignited a sense of calm in me. Life could be met through love, however imperfect, however messy. Weeks later, I returned home from work to discover Emma sitting in the living room, her expression a mix of anticipation and anxiety. "I heard from Mom," she announced quietly, gripping Caleb against her chest. The love in her gaze was infectious, simultaneously bringing peace and apprehension to my own heart. She explained how the letter had opened a door. The words flowed freely between them as if acknowledging the storm for what it was, without casting blame. Her mother, too, admitted her shortcomings and regret, recognizing the tempest that had brewed without her even realizing it. Their conversation meandered into a heartfelt exchange about expectations and the bonds that can both bind and separate family members. I could sense the heaviness lifting from Emma, creating space for laughter again, for joy, even among our challenges. Perhaps in some strange way, inviting her mother back into our lives would provide the companionship needed, not just for our son's milestones but also for the caregiving that would render our family life richer. Everything led up to the moment when we decided to invite Emma's mother to meet Caleb. On that warm Saturday afternoon, a few delicate clouds drifted across a sunny sky while the laughter of children reverberated through the air from nearby playgrounds. I prepared myself, half anxious but hopeful. Emma's mother arrived cautiously, her hands clutching a small gift, a soft blanket for our son. I couldn't help but see the nervousness in her actions as she approached, aware that old wounds were still healing beneath the surface. However, when Caleb gazed up at her with those bright, curious eyes, I saw something magical happen. Love blossomed amid uncertainty. As they shared clumsy but heartfelt moments in the nursery, it struck me how bridges could be patched and construable walls dismantled in small, careful increments. My heart swelled as I saw Emma guide her mother, pointing to Caleb's tiny fingers, her proud tone showcasing the sweet chaos of our family life. In that moment, I realized that we all carried our storms in different ways, yet together, we could find harmony amidst the noise. By facing not just my mother-in-law but my own fears, I learned that family doesn't come with guarantees, rather, it evolves, beautifully scarred yet resilient through the tides of time. We could only hope for a sturdy vessel, crafted from understanding and compassion, to sail us into calmer seas. And perhaps for now, it was enough. The phone call came out of the blue, shattering the fragile peace I had crafted for myself and my 2 young children in the years since the divorce. "He's gone," the voice on the other end faltered, and my heart sank. It was from a mutual friend, one of the few remaining ties to a man who had once been my partner before life took us down vastly different paths. The news of my ex-husband's sudden passing brought forth a wave of conflicting emotions that crashed over me like a stormy sea: anger, grief, and even remnants of love mingled with memories of the life we built together, now reduced to echoes and ghostly shadows. My children, Jason and Lily, played quietly in the living room, unaware of the turmoil brewing just beyond their innocence. What would I tell them? Should I bring them to the funeral? As the moments ticked away, I wrestled with the thought, envisioning their little faces, so full of curiosity and imagination, grappling with something so profound as death. Eventually, I made the decision: they needed to see their father, even if it was just a final goodbye wrapped in an unfamiliar wrapping of grief and closure. On the day of the funeral, the autumn leaves fluttered to the ground, painting a poignant backdrop of gold and crimson. The church, its steeple rising into the gray sky, seemed to absorb the sorrow unfolding within its walls. I held both of their small hands as we walked through the heavy wooden doors, the hushed murmurs of relatives and friends swirling around us like fog. I could feel Jason's grip tighten, his eyes darting nervously at the sight of people dressed in black, while Lily, blissfully unaware, kept asking where her daddy was. My heart ached at that innocent question. Would it be too much for them? Would they understand why we were here? But I swallowed my doubts, reminding myself that this was as much a part of our story as the laughter we had shared. We took our seats near the front, my heart racing as the service unfolded. Each word felt like a weighted stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. Echoes of memories, both painful and beautiful, reverberated in my mind, weaving a tapestry of our shared past. The moment we stood to say our final goodbyes, it became harder. Jason leaned against me, his small shoulders shaking with suppressed emotions, while Lily reached up, eyes wide and confused, asking in a hushed voice why everyone was crying. I knelt beside her, trying to explain, but my voice caught in my throat as I remembered the last time he had held her. In that frail, intimate moment, I was struck by a pang of guilt. Was I cross-building grief for my daughters? Or was this a brave moment for them, an opportunity to learn about loss and love in its most raw form? As we placed flowers on the casket, the scent mixing with the damp air, I felt a blend of sorrow and relief. Through the pain, I saw a flicker of resilience in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement that we had each other, bonded by our grief but steadfast against the storms beyond. The funeral was a long-awaited clarity, an intricate knot being untied slowly but surely, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. When it was done, and we stepped outside, the sun broke through the heavy clouds, casting a warm glow on our faces like a quiet blessing. As we drove home, the atmosphere in the car felt strangely lighter despite the weight of the day's events. I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing my kids fall asleep, heads leaning against each other without a care in the world. A soft hum of a lullaby from the radio melded perfectly with their gentle breathing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps I had done the right thing. I knew that the question would linger in the shadows of my mind: am I the asshole for taking them to their dad's funeral? But at that moment, I felt the weight of the world lift just a little, enough to know that perhaps this was a pivotal moment for all of us. When we got home, I tucked them into bed, kissed their foreheads, and closed their door lightly. In the quiet of the night, I reflected on our journey and the love that continued to bind us, even amid chaos. Maybe in sharing that last goodbye with their father, I taught them more about life and love than I could have anticipated. A few months later, after grappling with the grief and growing even closer as a family, I received a message from my ex-husband's sister, expressing gratitude for bringing the children to the funeral. She had shared how seeing Jason and Lily, alive and full of spirit, reminded everyone of the kindness he had in life even after the rocky years of our separation. It surprised me how much that acknowledgement lifted my spirits. And as I sat under the evening sky, watching the stars blink to life, I finally felt at peace with my decision. Through heartbreak, we had found a new, albeit different, strength, and I had come to realize that even in death, there are lessons of love we could carry forward. In the days following the funeral, I found myself reflecting on the lessons we had extracted from such a heavy experience. The gray clouds still lingered, but they had dulled, and the sun had begun to peek through them, offering a tender warmth I hadn't felt in months. Jason and Lily seemed lighter, too, their laughter echoing through our home like notes of a sweet melody that I had forgotten existed. We often held impromptu dance parties in our living room, twirling around to songs we'd collectively chosen, diving into that blissful state where worries melted away. It was during one of these dance-offs that I looked down to see their wide, carefree grins mirrored in my own, and at that moment, I realized how profoundly their father's passing had transformed our lives. What I had originally feared would unravel the fragile stitchwork of our family, his absence, was, against all odds, stitching us closer together. I thought of the days when I would speak about Jason, carefully, navigating the minefield of memories. I never belittled the complexities of our past, but as we revisited those moments, his laugh during movie nights, his ridiculous attempts at cooking, I saw my kids embrace their father's humanity. They were mourning him, but they were also celebrating the colorful imprints he had left behind. It was a complicated tapestry of memories, threaded with both pain and joy, and we were weaving it tighter each time we shared those tales. One evening, while tucking them into bed, Lily, with her big brown eyes twinkling like stars, asked if we could make a memory jar. "We can put in all the best things we remember about Dad," she said softly, her tiny fingers pulling the hem of her blanket. Jason nodded, his brow furrowed in thought, thinking of the happiest moments he could find. We grabbed an assortment of markers, colorful paper, and a simple glass jar I had kept on a shelf, dusting it off like a forgotten treasure. Night after night, we would write little stories, favorite moments, even sporadic thoughts that seemed to flash from the corners of their minds, each one a colorful reflection of their father. It felt cathartic, as though by encapsulating those memories, we were holding on to him in a way that wouldn't let go as time moved forward. Yet, there was still a lingering uncertainty in my heart. Even with the sense of community that filled my surroundings, I feared judgment. Did I make the right choice about the funeral? On an increasingly quiet evening, I found myself scrolling through social media, the old posts, the funeral photos, comments of sympathy interspersed with shared memories. Yet there it was, the muffled sting of one comment that caught my eye and twisted in my gut: why on earth would you bring the kids to their father's funeral? I swallowed hard, contemplating the bluntness of it. Did I really make a grave mistake by honoring a man they had known as their father? Poking at that old wound opened up a familiar cascade of guilt. The anger crept in, too. It was unfair to project their feelings onto me. I had tried my best. As I flipped through the comments, I stumbled upon a thoughtful reply that shifted my perspective. Maybe it was a lesson in love for them, not an act of cruelty. Feeling the heaviness lift slightly, I realized I wasn't alone in this. So many parents face judgment, and for each of those harsh voices echoing in my mind, there were countless parents who had found their own way, each soldiering through their challenges, fighting battles of their own, learning to let love guide them. I closed my phone with a newfound determination and focused instead on my children who were now deep asleep, the reassuring sound of their breaths filling the room like a comforting lullaby. Weeks passed and our little family developed a new rhythm. I sometimes still encountered sporadic judgment, especially within our small town, like when I would run into familiar faces at the grocery store. Each smiled. Nod felt loaded. Sometimes, people would make small talk about the weather, while others would simply look down, avoiding eye contact altogether. Those moments were filled with undertones of unspoken words, yet they began to bother me less. I remembered why I had made the choice to bring Jason and Lily to that funeral. It was about remembering, celebrating, and finding closure, the very things we were doing in our memory jar. One day, as we were placing a new handwritten memory into the jar, a ticket stub from a concert we had attended, it struck me how much healing was packed into those tiny slips of paper. They were seeds, really, nurturing new perspectives and fostering an understanding of our past. It had opened the door to conversations about life, love, and everything in between. I knew then that whatever anyone else might say, I was right where I needed to be. And so, as the nights rolled on and our little tradition of adding to the memory jar continued, I found that it not only enclosed stories about Jason but also made space for our own emerging narrative, a story of resilience, love, and the determination to move forward while cherishing the footprints left behind. Perhaps it wouldn't heal every pang of grief, but it fortified us with a sense of purpose in honoring what remained. With each memory shared, I felt our spirits intertwine, a quiet testament that life and love would always find a way. As I sat with them wrapped in their dreams, I recognized the profound truth in that sentiment. Even amidst the chaos of our history, we had woven a tapestry of love that would only continue to grow. And perhaps with that, I wouldn't just be a survivor of our heartache, I would be a champion for the enduring bond that we shared, a reminder that even through loss, life persistently finds room for love. The days following the funeral, I found myself wandering through a landscape of emotions that felt bright yet shadowed at times. I would often catch the scent of Jason's cologne lingering on an old jacket in the closet, a bittersweet reminder of our past that pulled at my heartstrings. The kids adjusted remarkably well to the absence of their father. For them, it was a cascade of memories they could sift through, moments captured in laughter and warmth. I often found them buried under blankets as they shared stories about their favorites, the camping trips in the backyard that morphed into grand adventures or the spontaneous kitchen experiments that ended in a mess but always ended with giggles. Their joy danced around me, a soothing balm for the ache of loss, and I began to understand the true gifts Jason had left behind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I sat with Lily and Jason at the kitchen table, painting the memories that still flickered in our hearts. We had set out a canvas, brush strokes letting each of us contribute a color or shape that represented our remembrances. I watched as they threaded together tales of camping escapades mixed with their father's goofy jokes and stories about how he'd always sing the wrong lyrics to their favorite songs. The laughter rang out like a melody, a stark contrast to the somber silence that had enveloped our home just days earlier. I could see how much they lived in those precious whirls of color and warmth, every stroke a testament to their resilience and the love that endured beyond our pain. My heart swelled with pride, a realization that even through our fragmented family, the bond we shared was vibrant and alive, creating a shelter at a time when rain threatened to wash away hope. It became clear to me that we were shaping our own narrative together now, one filled with the richness of memories and the promise of new beginnings, however uncertain they might be. This was our therapy, a way to weave Jason's essence into our lives rather than letting it vanish into silence. Every time I saw my children immerse themselves in their memories, a newfound sense of purpose washed over me. They were, in many ways, guiding me to a conclusion I hadn't been ready to face just days before. Jason had left us much more than just memories of times gone by. He had imparted lessons on how to love deeply, even when things were imperfect. As the nights rolled on, I embraced the routine of storytelling, of laughter ringing through our home, and of painting their dreams. I shared with them how loss could transform into appreciation, encouraging them to always look at the silver lining, however faint it may seem on some days. Our conversations turned from sorrow to dreams of the future, filled with wild wishes and hopes that danced in their eyes. It was in moments like these that I found clarity. The past, however tumultuous, shaped not just our pain but also our resilience and our ability to pivot, to adapt, and to rise anew. One night, tucking Lily into bed after another day of reminiscing and laughter, she looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with understanding far beyond her years. "Mom," she whispered, "maybe Daddy just wanted us to be happy. Maybe that's why he wanted us to remember the fun times and not the sad ones." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of ageless wisdom being passed down, both a reflection of her father's love and her own burgeoning understanding of life. "You're right, sweetheart," I replied, pulling her close. "He wanted us to be happy, and we can honor him by living fully." As I kissed my children goodnight, a warm sense of acceptance enveloped me. I realized that Jason's death could be the end of a chapter, but it wouldn't be the end of our story. As weeks turned into months, I noticed more than just a glimmer of hope trying to burst forth in our lives. The kids began to smile more freely, and in quiet moments, they'd share funny stories about a dad who would come home with silly toys or initiate awkward dance-offs in the living room. Moments I never fully appreciated while he was there. Together we began acknowledging our pain without letting it govern our lives. Over time, I found myself at the edge of true healing, discovering that while life could be harsh, it was also beautiful, and it was our responsibility to keep it alive, to fuel it with laughter, love, and warmth. In a strange twist of fate, I became a tribute bearer of Jason's heart. And just as summer began to yield to the cool whispers of fall, I noticed an unexpected lightness in my step. It struck me one chilly evening as we roasted marshmallows in the backyard, the laughter, the camaraderie we had built, the jokes shared, this was what Jason would have wanted. We were not defining our lives by our loss, rather, we were embracing it as part of our complex tapestry. When the stars shone brightly that night, I felt the words of my children touching the strands of my heart. "Let's do this every week," Jason exclaimed as he handed me his s'more creation. "He'd definitely want us to enjoy the fun stuff." I smiled, realizing that through our journey, we would forever carry the essence of our shared past with us, not as a burden, but as a beacon, guiding us toward a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. And so, we molded a new memory each week under the stars, stitching Jason into the fabric of our lives more beautifully than I ever thought possible. Months later, as I reflected on our journey, I felt a profound sense of gratitude shape my being. Life, I concluded, like love, is an evolving narrative, an intricate dance of letting go and holding on. A few friends had reached out tentatively since the funeral, offering their condolences while hesitantly questioning my choices, but I found comfort and pride in my decision to bring the kids. It solidified our legacy and illustrated to my children the importance of accepting life's dual nature, both its joys and sorrows. With every memory painted and every moment shared, we were crafting a life that resonated not just with happiness but with an understanding that love endures, transcending even the hardest of goodbyes. And in that realization, as I moved that evening to snuff out the small fire in the backyard, I whispered a quiet promise into the night. Our future would be colored with the hues of hope, courage, and unwavering love, welcoming all the joy that life dared to send our way. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon, the kind where the fading light seemed to seep through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room, and I found myself curled up in my favorite chair with a steaming mug of chamomile tea cradled between my hands. My name is Lucy, and at 32, I have perfected the art of being the family mediator. My brother, Ben, is 4 years younger than me and has always been the golden child, charming, athletic, and now engaged to Tara, a woman who seemed equally perfect on the surface. Lately, however, something about Tara felt off, and on that particular afternoon, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I needed to talk to my mom about it. We settled into our usual routine, chatting about the mundane details of the week, until I finally broached the subject, tentatively mentioning how I had overheard a conversation between Ben and Tara that felt suspicious. It was more about her complications during the pregnancy than anything else, and although I initially brushed it off, the unease had lingered long after. Mom listened intently, her brow furrowing as I recounted the conversation. I wasn't trying to gossip, it was more an attempt to express my concern, to make sense of the tension building in my family. As I spoke, I could see the worry etched on my mother's face, and I almost regretted opening up. What if it upset her or made her doubt her son's judgment? The last thing I wanted was to fracture our family dynamic. But the more I spoke, the more I felt that maybe I wasn't the only one who sensed something amiss. My mom finally took a deep breath, and with an incredulous look, she shared how she too had observed odd behaviors from Tara, especially how she seldom spoke of the baby without a hint of hesitation. My heart raced, teetering on the edge of suspicion. Was it possible that my gut instinct was right? The conversation spiraled, weaving through layers of what-ifs, and soon we were digging into the details of Tara's past, which we had only pieced together from Ben's largely glowing accounts. The discussion fueled a whirlwind of emotions within me. It felt strange to judge someone who was soon to be family, but there was an undeniable tension growing like a shadow over our household. Days passed, and despite my desire to distance myself from the tumultuous thoughts, I found myself contemplating my brother's happiness and sanity. The knowledge of my chat with my mom nagged at me. Was I being the supportive sibling or merely perpetuating family drama? The more I pondered, the heavier the air felt, until one evening, Ben called me unexpectedly. He sounded off, his voice trembled slightly, and his laughter felt forced. The perfect brother had cracked. My stomach twisted, and I listened as he talked about the challenges of impending fatherhood, how Tara's recent erratic behavior was something he was trying to understand. I wanted to scream, "You've got to be careful." But instead, I urged him to lean on me if he ever needed to vent. I realized then how much I cared for him and how reluctant I was to see him hurt, but did that make me an asshole for even discussing my worries with Mom in the first place? In a moment of vulnerability, I decided to confide in Ben about the conversation with Mom. I expected outrage, a defensive posture, but to my surprise, he was quiet, contemplative. He promised to talk things over with Tara. After hanging up, nausea washed over me. Was it right to have stirred this pot, or was I simply being protective? The weight of my choices felt suffocating, and while I hoped it would lead to clarity, I feared the storm it could unleash. Weeks later, something unforeseen happened. Ben called again, but this time his voice was laced with relief. Tara had agreed to family counseling, and during their discussions, it had come out that she had been under immense pressure, family struggles and the overwhelming fears of motherhood were buried deep, and she had masked them behind a facade of happiness. It wasn't deceit, it was pain, and a fear of inadequacy that I had never considered. My heart sank as I realized how misguided my suspicions had been. I had put Tara under the spotlight without truly knowing her story, and now I was left with mixed feelings about the gossip I shared with my mom. What I thought was an innocent conversation had triggered a catalyst for something much deeper. In the end, I breathed a sigh of relief, not just for Ben but for Tara too, who was at last seeking the help she desperately needed. I turned to my mom, who had been waiting anxiously to hear the news, and laughed softly at how quickly things had spiraled out of control. I realized I wasn't an asshole, I was simply human, trying to navigate the chaos of family life. Family dynamics certainly are complicated, filled with emotions that intertwine like vines. As I sipped my tea and reflected on the journey, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me, and I could finally embrace the imperfections that came with love. Maybe it was all just part of the messiness, and I wouldn't shy away from it again. Update: a few months later, Tara invited my mom and me for coffee, and for the first time, I saw a woman who had started to find her footing once again. We talked openly, and I realized the power of vulnerability and healing. This was no longer about suspicion or gossip, it was about connection and understanding. As I sat among family, a newfound sense of openness enveloped me, and I knew we were all moving forward together, one step at a time. The shadows had lifted, revealing a path to a stronger family bond, forged through honesty and love. As the warm sunlight flooded through the cafe window, illuminating the small round table where my mother, Tara, and I sat, I couldn't help but think about how far we had all come in just a few short months. The echoes of past gossip and the weight of previous misunderstandings felt like distant memories, replaced instead by the sound of laughter and heartfelt conversation. Tara, once a figure cloaked in suspicion and tension, now radiated a sense of acceptance that I hadn't anticipated. She spoke candidly about her struggles, her voice steady, yet softening with each word, a stark contrast to the defensiveness that had once marked our exchanges. The cafe buzzed with the hum of patrons and the clinking of cups, but in that small bubble of shared vulnerability, it felt as if time had consolidated just for us. I shared my feelings about the turmoil that had erupted within our family, how the whispering fears about her integrity had clouded our judgment, and how difficult it had been to navigate my loyalty to my mother while also grappling with my concerns about Tara's motives. Yet, as we spoke, her eyes shone with a depth of understanding that made me realize she had been fighting her own battles, ones I had overlooked in my eagerness to protect my brother. It dawned on me that the gossip which had initially driven a wedge between us now served as a gateway for true connection, a means through which we could strip away our facades and share our inner truths. At that moment, surrounded by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the simple delight of a sunlit afternoon, I felt the bonds of family stretching and reshaping. We laughed gently as we reminisced about lighter memories, free from the weight of suspicion, and I could feel an invisible thread weaving us tighter together. My mom, watching this exchange with a quiet smile, seemed relieved to witness the evolution of our dynamic, as if years of tension were finally easing from her shoulders. It was a strange familiarity, one I hadn't realized I missed so deeply, where we could just be ourselves without hidden agendas or whispered worries. As our cups clinked in a toast to new beginnings, I felt a deep-seated hope rise within me. We were healing, yes, but it was more than that. We were rebuilding, a family not just forged from blood, but from shared experiences and a commitment to understanding one another in our most vulnerable states. We talked about future family gatherings and the kids we hoped to have, and for the first time, I envisioned Tara as an aunt, someone my children could look up to. It felt liberating to finally embrace the idea that the bond we were forming could stand resilient, even against the tides of uncertainty we had all faced. The cafe buzz faded into the background as I silently vowed to always prioritize honesty and openness in our conversations moving forward. Little did I know that this meeting was only the beginning of our transformation. As we stood to leave, our spirits lifted, I caught Tara's eye, a shared understanding passing between us that hinted at the shared journey ahead, a commitment to support each other, to embrace our differences, and to keep the channels of communication wide open. Life, with all its complexities, was stretching out before us like an uncharted path, and for the first time, I felt eager rather than apprehensive about the road ahead. What started as mere speculation had blossomed into a deeper narrative of family and resilience, reminding us all of the possibility that lies within trust and vulnerability. With that beautiful thought, I stepped out into the sunlit streets, my heart lighter than it had been in years, feeling as if I had not only gained a second sister-in-law but also a true friend. In the months that followed, conversations flourished, misunderstandings disintegrated, and what we had once regarded as gossip became the foundation upon which we built a family rich in understanding and love. It was in those quiet moments of sharing our lives, our fears, and our dreams that I realized this journey was worth every misstep, every whisper, and every moment I had doubted. Tara had secured her place in our family, and together we forged a connection that was resilient and transformative, one step at a time. However, as life in our family resumed its comfortably chaotic rhythm, a lingering thought occasionally flickered in the back of my mind, resembling a distant chime reminiscent of the earlier unease. I had learned so much from the experience of sharing my doubts and fears with both my mother and Tara, yet the fact that the whispers had once permeated our lives felt like a dark echo, reverberating in corners I couldn't quite reach. Sure, we had emerged from the shadows, but I sensed that the path to unshakable trust in our relationships was still a winding one filled with cobbled stones left over from prior storms. One dusky evening, as I sat curled in my favorite armchair with a mug of chamomile tea in hand, I felt a pang of anxiety pierce through the warm comfort of our newfound familial harmony. I began to wonder, what if Tara's past could come surging back into the spotlight? What if, in our quest for connection, we had overlooked the footprints of doubt that still lingered on the edges of our joy? Those thoughts found their way into our gatherings, muted but present. It was a sort of shadow that crept around the edges of our conversations. Tara remained vibrant and engaged but seemed weary at times, like a flower that flourishes under sunlight, yet sometimes craves rain, anticipating its own inner storms with cautious apprehension. My brother Daniel and Tara had begun planning their wedding, and with every small detail shared in our new group discussions, there was an undercurrent of tension, tugging uncomfortably at my thoughts. Was this a facade? Were they both displaying happiness while secretly struggling? I wanted so badly to trust in what we had cultivated. I felt I owed it to Tara, to Daniel, and to myself, to believe in this fresh start wholeheartedly. Then, one afternoon, as our conversations continued to grow easier with each coffee date and family gathering, my mother called me with an urgency that shattered my calm. "Can you come over? Tara is here, and I think she's having a rough time." The air suddenly thickened around me, tangling my senses into a web of concern and confusion. I hurried over, my heart racing in rhythm with my thoughts. "Please, let this not be a step backward," I prayed silently as I drove through familiar streets now draped with an unease I had hoped was behind us. As I entered the house, I found Tara sitting in the living room, her face obscured by trembling hands, and my mother's eyes bright with unshed tears. Without needing words, I realized that this moment would determine if we could face any wave that life threw our way. Together, we could navigate through the tempestuous waters, or we could allow it to crash over us, unraveling our cherished connection. I settled beside Tara, taking a breath that felt like it carried the weight of my deepest fears. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," I said gently, breaking the suffocating silence. In that moment, I prayed she would see my sincerity reflected in the depths of her own eyes. Slowly, Tara's shuddering breath steadied, and after the longest pause, she began to speak. Her voice trembled as she shared her insecurities, fears about the wedding, and the haunting doubts that echoed from her past. My heart ached to hear her struggles, yet I was grateful to witness her vulnerability. None of us were perfect, after all, and the beautiful tapestry of our lives was made richer by our imperfections. This unforeseen moment of honesty became a turning point. Instead of retreating into doubt, we leaned into our shared experiences, wrapping ourselves in understanding and compassion. The connection we had forged, mingled with the trials we faced, allowed us to weave our stories together tightly, creating not only a supportive circle but a sanctuary where we felt safe enough to wreck the facade of perfect happiness. From that day forward, I understood that our family was not just a collection of individuals expected to shine at all times. We were a constellation of glimmers and shimmers, quirks and quiet battles. With Tara by my side and my mother's unconditional love binding us together, we slowly unveiled each other's fears and dreams, transforming our past shadows into the light of awareness and compassion. I felt a renewed sense of hope fill my heart, reminding me that while the path may be winding, our willingness to be honest and vulnerable was the compass guiding us forward. The journey to healing is never linear, I learned. It's filled with dips and slides, with moments that may pull apart threads only to weave them closer again. Every time we face life's uncertainties together, I found solace in the realization that our love, our family bond, was worth the challenges. Moments of laughter mingled with tears became the framework of what family meant for us. As I reflected on our growth that night, an indelible thought struck me, echoing softly as I gradually drifted off to sleep. Even amidst the fragility of life, the strongest foundations are often built upon the honesty of shared experiences, nourishing the roots of love and friendship that grow resiliently with each passing moment. It was supposed to be just another holiday gathering, filled with laughter, festive decorations, and a bit too much eggnog, yet it transformed into one of the most pivotal moments of my life. My close-knit group of friends had established a tradition of a white elephant gift exchange, where the goal was to bring something humorous or quirky to swap around the circle. This year, I felt inspired. After days of thinking, I decided to gift a vintage-looking box, aged like an artifact, wrapped in gold foil that glimmered under the twinkling Christmas lights. Little did any of us know, it was more than just an old box. To everyone's amusement, when my best friend Alex unwrapped it, inside was a scratch-off lottery ticket I had thrown in on a whim, just to keep things lighthearted. Laughter erupted when he scratched it off, only to find out that it was worth over $1 million. At that moment, it felt like I was in a fairy tale. Yet, as the initial shock began to fade, a heavy feeling settled in my stomach, as excitement morphed into uncertainty. For days, we celebrated, a party filled with playful banter, immense joy, and, surprisingly, stakes that transformed the bonds of friendship into something frayed and fragile. The conversation soon shifted from congratulatory remarks to some friends expressing that, because the winning ticket had originated from my white elephant gift, I had an obligation to share the wealth. After all, the ticket had not just sprung forth from thin air, it was part of a game played between us. I remember sitting at home in my small, cozy apartment that night, staring at the blinking light of my phone as the group chat erupted with opinions, judgments, and a sense of entitlement that rattled me to my core. I began to feel torn. On one hand, I wanted to help my friends, especially since they had been my support group through thick and thin, but on the other, it was a significant amount of money that I had never expected to see, and it felt deeply personal to me. As I continued to navigate the whirlwind of discussions, some of my friends took it a step further, outright demanding their share of my newfound fortune. They argued that I shouldn't have even included the ticket as part of the gift, highlighting how, as the giver, I had unintentionally created this awkward position. My doubts began to grow into whispers in my mind, trying to convince me that I was the one who was being selfish and greedy. Such thoughts gnawed at me, leading to sleepless nights, but I also cherished the idea that perhaps this money could help me rebuild my life. I had been stuck in a rut, toiling away in a mediocre job that barely paid enough to cover rent and bills, and now I could not only pay off my debts, but I could also travel, invest in furthering my career, and maybe even start on that overly ambitious dream of mine, opening a small bookstore cafe by the coast where stories would seep through the walls like sweet laughter. But the rift grew. The gifts from Christmas became burdens that I contemplated every waking moment. To distance myself from the conversations that blurred the lines of friendship, I withdrew from the group chat for a time, taking each day to regroup. I took long walks in the nearby park, letting the cool air fill my lungs while my mind wrestled with the notion of entitlement. I even visited an old bookstore to distract myself, where I could lose hours wandering between the bookshelves that smelled of musty paper and adventure. Eventually, after a week of wrestling with my thoughts, I decided to face my friends. I arranged a casual dinner, a final gathering to resolve our unspoken tension. As the evening unfolded, I chose to be honest. I sat them down, carefully explaining how the ticket had landed in a box meant solely for fun, devoid of the weight of expectations and obligations. I wanted to stress that while they were my dear friends, the money felt deeply personal to me, a newfound hope for my future. I could see their disappointment, and truthfully, it pierced me. The laughter that had once echoed around us now felt muted. However, I also saw glimmers of understanding in their eyes, and that conversation provided the resolution we so desperately needed. It wasn't about who deserved what, but about maintaining the bonds we had nurtured over the years. As the night wound down, one friend, Clara, who had always been the voice of reason, gave me a reflective look. She smiled softly and stated, "You know, sometimes life throws us surprises, not to be shared or divided, but to change our paths." It struck me deeply. That moment became a tapestry of emotions, a blend of relief, sadness, and resolve. I chose to embrace the good that the lottery had brought into my life while also holding steadfast to the relationships that mattered. In the weeks that followed, I found my footing. I still communicated with my friends, but now it was with less pressure, and whatever division had sprung eased with understanding and communication. Instead of sharing a part of my winnings, I offered to treat them to a weekend trip to celebrate our friendship without the strings of money. And in many ways, the act of spending time together felt even more fulfilling than any monetary exchange. In the end, it was not just about the lottery ticket but about navigating the complexities of relationships and choosing to value friendship over obligation. Ultimately, the lottery had not stripped me of friends but led me to reassess what truly mattered, the authenticity of connections that would thrive regardless of wealth. Update: a few months later, I took another little leap. I followed my heart and opened that bookstore cafe. It was cozy and beautifully chaotic, filled with shelves of stories inviting all who came in. I was pleasantly surprised when some friends offered to contribute their time and skills to help me shoulder the load. Clara even stepped up and helped design the space, jarred mugs with coded messages printed on the sides for the secret menu. There's joy in seeing the delight on people's faces as they step into a world of books and coffee, and on Saturdays, when the place is bustling, I've realized that my path hasn't just changed, it's blossomed into something altogether beautiful. But just as everything was coming together, a shadow loomed over my little haven of caffeine and literature. It was a few months after our grand opening when I received an unexpected call from my brother, Mark, who, after a string of misfortunes, had moved back in with our parents. "You won't believe it," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "I bought a lottery ticket, and I actually won $50,000. I could hear the triumph behind his words, and part of me felt uplifted by his good fortune, but another part of me squirmed at the implications. After all, during that white elephant gift exchange a few weeks prior, we had used the ticket as just that, a joke among friends, something to pass around for laughs, like the ugly sweater no one wanted. The ticket had cost a mere $10, but now it had transformed into an unexpected fortune. The problem lingered in the back of my mind like an itch. Should I pay my brother back for that ticket? My first instinct was to smile and celebrate his success, acknowledging his hard luck turning into a windfall. However, as I watched the cafe thrive, my initial goodwill began to warp under the weight of guilt. I hadn't contributed anything to that silly ticket, nor had I envisioned sharing the wealth or what it might mean for my brother to suddenly have significant amounts of money. It shouldn't be a burdensome obligation, should it? The constant flirtation with self-doubt made my heart race. As I ruminated, I also felt a growing resentment rise against Mark. He was back with my parents, lacking direction, while I had pulled myself together to create something fulfilling. Every week, he kept bringing up potential ideas for what he could do with the winnings. A vacation. Then a new car. In those moments, I found myself resenting that $10 ticket more and more. Weeks passed, and I noticed more requests from Mark. While the cafe had become a green and nurturing space for creativity, Mark's intentions weighed heavy on me. "Why don't you just loan me a little bit to get started?" he'd suggest, each word slithering into my brain like smoke. "You can always recoup it after I get my business going." One afternoon, as I stirred the rich, dark coffee, my stomach twisted with anxiety. Clara noticed and stopped by with a gentle touch to my arm. "What's bothering you?" she asked, and I hesitated before spilling my thoughts like beans into a grinding machine. She listened quietly, concern knitting her brow. "You're not obligated to share anything," she said finally, taking a sip of her espresso, "but you shouldn't feel guilty if you want to help." But there was more to it. It was the emotional knot I had with Mark, our childhood, entwined in responsibility and rivalry. I resented the fact that he had the ability to get something for nothing while I had to build everything from my courage and sweat. One Thursday afternoon, I finally decided to confront him. "Listen, Mark," I started, holding the phone to my ear, feeling the warmth of the cafe's summer breeze danced around me. "I know you're excited about your winnings, and I'm happy for you, but you need to understand. I can't help with your plans. That ticket was never mine to claim or share." His silence felt heavy, a moment too long before he spoke. "Wow, so that's it?" The chill in his tone froze me in place. It felt dreadful but necessary to stand firm, to balance the weight of harsh truth with the buoyancy of love. "But it's my ticket," he continued defiantly. "You were there when I bought it. It's not just luck, I could have picked another ticket, you know? Be better. Be supportive." With every word he poured out, my resolve thinned. "I'm trying to be supportive, Mark, but you can't expect me, of all people, to just distribute money when I'm still figuring out my own life." Somehow, I managed to hang up without feeling like a complete jerk, and as I processed the conversation, I finally felt a flicker of relief. Time passed, and the confrontation became a raw, necessary wound that slowly healed. Through the simmering tension with my brother, I found clarity about my own dreams. The cafe continued to thrive, filled with laughter, warmth, and the soft scent of beans roasting in the back. Clara became my confidant, and together we hosted small writing workshops, each word crafted under the light of connection. Despite the distance with Mark, I began to accept that his choices were his own, separate from my journey, as I found empowerment in the depths of the rooted relationships I built day by day. Months later, I received a text from Mark, one that was devoid of the old bitterness. "Hey, I went on a little trip. It was great. Hope the cafe's doing well, he wrote. A simple note that felt woven with maturity and intent. I responded, letting him know how much the cafe had grown. I didn't owe him anything, and while our relationship became more distant over time, I couldn't help but feel a thread of hope weaving back through our connection, fragile yet promising, just like the very venture I cherished. As I stood behind the counter one morning, with sunlight spilling golden rays through the window, I realized that sometimes, making choices for your happiness meant letting go of guilt, a lesson I hoarded quietly as I breathed in the intoxicating aroma of roasted beans and fresh stories yet to be told. The cafe continued to flourish, much to my delight. I leaned into the rhythm of each day, where the sound of the door chiming would greet me with the promise of new connections. One particularly crisp morning, I found myself overwhelmed with gratitude as I greeted regulars and newcomers. Alike, their smiles infectious, the aroma of brewing coffee wrapping around us like a soft blanket. Clara had this way of lighting up the room whenever she walked in. She carried an energy that was both calming and invigorating. That day, however, felt different. A magnetic energy buzzed beneath the ordinary hustle and bustle. I was preparing for a community event, one that Clara had suggested to foster deeper ties with our patrons. We decided to host a monthly open mic night, where writers, musicians, and poets could showcase their talents, a showcase of voices competing only with the sound of clattering mugs and warm laughter. It was during our final preparations, stringing fairy lights above the circular tables and piling chairs in cozy arrangements, that I noticed Jason standing outside the cafe, hands shoved deep in his pockets with that same familiar expression etched across his features, a mix of longing and hesitation. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. No matter how far our lives had drifted apart, the sight of him brought back a whirlwind of memories and a rush of old emotions. For a moment, I debated whether to invite him inside, but the fog of uncertainty clouded my decision. As the evening wore on and the cafe came alive, untouched notes filled the air, voices weaving tales both heartwarming and haunting. Clara's infectious laughter faded in and out as I caught glimpses of familiar faces sharing moments, and then, almost as if time had folded, Jason stepped through the door. The room hushed momentarily, strangers turned into an audience, and I felt my pulse quicken. He looked around, his eyes searching, and landed on me with a gaze so earnest that it melted the seconds into something palpable. I couldn't help but manage a weak smile, my heart oscillating between pleasure and panic. After the first act concluded, he approached me, and I could feel the vibrations of my surroundings dim, the clinking glasses and buzzing chatter fading into the backdrop of our shared history. "I came to see you," he confessed, his voice the same as I remembered but laced with a timbre of vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. I blinked, struggling for words. Here we stood, transformed by time, yet the undercurrents of unspoken sentiments lingered in the air like a fine mist. I asked him how he had found me, and the conversation spilled out like secrets carefully hoarded, revealing pieces of our lives since we last made contact. He told me about his trials, struggles with his decisions, and how he'd realized the importance of relationships that once mattered to him. Encouraging him to join the open mic crowd, I found myself eased by the moment. The fear I had pinpointed as regret fell softly as he stepped up to perform, seemingly transformed by the acceptance that enveloped him. As he shared his heartfelt song, the audience felt like a gentle embrace, and I couldn't help but lose myself in the harmony that wove through the room. There was beauty in the shared experience. It reminded me that reconciliation doesn't always seek perfection, but requires vulnerability and openness to growth. Our paths, so differently aligned, had somehow allowed us to converge again, revealing that understanding could form new threads, stitching old pains with the fabric of compassion. By the time the last act settled and the cafe's light began to dim, Jason and I found ourselves enveloped in a tranquil embrace of understanding. As I locked up and waved goodbye to the last lingering customers, who unfurled their stories into the night, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Perhaps, I mused, mistakes didn't have to be anchors but rather lessons gently guiding us toward growth and renewal. With the sweet taste of coffee lingering in my mouth and the warmth of rekindled connection bubbling in my chest, I closed the door behind me, knowing that life would never cease to surprise me with its exquisite range of possibilities. I fell into a contemplative silence as I reflected on the day's unfolding, grateful not just for the cafe, but for the chance encounters and unpredictable paths that lead us back to where we truly belong, whether with friends old or new, wrapped in the comfort of second chances. I still remember the sound of my heart thumping in my chest, a primal rhythm interrupted only by the low hum of chatter from the family gathering. Christmas had always been a chaotic blend of laughter and light amidst the stress of looming responsibilities. But this year felt different, it felt heavy. My Uncle Harold was the center of attention, regaling everyone with elaborate tales of his upcoming surprise vacation to the Maldives for his daughter's Christmas gift, a trip that might as well have been a vacation of the gods. A sun-soaked getaway, oceans kissed by golden rays, while I sat a mere 10 feet away, feeling the tightening knot of resentment coiling in my stomach, the air thick with something bitter and unspoken. Just a few months back, he had borrowed $700 from me, promising to pay it back by summer, but summer had turned to fall and was now fading into winter, and here he was, talking about flopping on a beach while I was left holding the weight of unpaid debts and dwindling savings. The world outside the window streaked with winter sleet seemed a stark contrast to the sun-drenched life he was about to embark upon. I hadn't begrudged him his joy, but as he continued to expound on the grandeur of this vacation, my fingers involuntarily clenched around my glass, my knuckles turning white. I could feel the warmth of the room, the lights twinkling merrily above us, while my thoughts swirled with unease and doubt. Was I being unreasonable? Was it wrong to feel this way about family? They say money and family don't mix, and yet here I was, struggling to reconcile my love for my family with the hurt of when it felt like we were no longer on the same playing field. With every laugh and cheer from the gathered relatives, I felt the walls closing in around me, pressing on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I thought about his daughter, how this vacation would be something magical for her, a memory that would last a lifetime. But that didn't change the fact that I needed that money, too: bills, groceries, a pair of shoes that didn't have a hole worn through the sole. And then something snapped inside me, birthed from a mix of frustration and desperation. My voice broke the laughter like a sudden winter chill cutting through warm air, and I caught everyone's attention, all faces looking towards me. "Harold, can we talk about that loan?" The room fell quiet, the joyful energy draining from my words as the focus shifted from dreams of sun-soaked bliss to the heavy topic of debt. Harold looked taken aback, his expression shifting from jovial to defensive, his boastful demeanor deflating like an untied balloon. "What are you talking about?" he replied, the twinkle in his eye replaced by something darker. I could feel the weight of my words, like stones thrown into a placid lake, rippling out to the circles of family surrounding us. "The $700 you borrowed? I really need it back." There was an awkward silence, filled with muffled gasps and glances exchanged between family members, their expressions a mix of shock and, I could swear, a hint of contempt. I'd broken an unspoken convention, drawn back the curtain that shielded our family's fragile dynamics. Harold bristled, his pride wounded yet hidden behind a facade of casual irritation. "Come on, you know I'm good for it," he replied, the bravado slipping back into his tone. "This trip is for Sarah, don't make this about money now." But it was all about the money I had graciously lent him in confidence, thinking I'd be repaid before the year turned another page. I saw the embarrassment flicker in his eyes, fleeting yet sharp. I pressed on, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "I shouldn't have to feel guilty for needing what's already mine. I saved up for ages to lend it to you." The conversation dwindled into muffled complaints from Harold and whispers from the other relatives. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, unable to look away as the anger simmered beneath the surface. It felt excruciating yet liberating to have put it out there, a gaping wound laid bare that couldn't be sewn shut. In that moment, I realized the cost wasn't just material, it struck at the very heart of familial trust, turning us both into strangers fighting for something that had once been given freely. The evening wore on, and Harold eventually retreated from the conversation, a shadowy figure reclaiming the spotlight with half-hearted laughter. But I had crossed a threshold, and though the breadcrumbs of resentment might linger, I felt a strange lightness, an acknowledgement of my own needs amid the familial chaos. The unease didn't dissolve entirely, but I found peace in confronting the truth, and I experienced the beginnings of guilt dissipating, leaving space for clarity in its wake. A few days post-Christmas, I received a text from my uncle, a simple "Hey, let's get together, I'd like to clear the air." He'd agreed to pay me back in installments, starting with the first next week. I felt a rush of mixed emotions as I read the message. Relief washed over me, yes, but with it came a creeping wish that things didn't have to be difficult, ignited by the knowledge that confronting him had altered our relationship forever, shifting some foundational floorboards that would never return to their original status. I realized then, processing this new ground we stood upon, that sometimes, families could only rediscover themselves through honesty, grimy and raw as it may feel, but worth the discomfort for the sake of healing. As the weeks progressed, I found myself caught in a curious limbo. Each time my phone pinged with a message, my heart fluttered with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, anticipation for a glimpse of the man I'd once called my uncle and anxiety about what each check-in would herald. His first payment arrived promptly the following Friday. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope that bore my name, the familiar handwriting inside. It felt strange, like crossing forbidden ground, as if opening that envelope would further peel away the layers of our relationship, revealing the raw truth beneath. The moment I pulled out the check, a wave of relief surged through me, quickly followed by an echoing reminder of his promises. The feeling was bittersweet. I was grateful for the money, of course, but I couldn't shake the heaviness in my heart. That Sunday, family dinner rolled around, and with it came a palpable tension gnawing at the corners of my mind. We gathered in my parents' living room, the air thick with the scent of my mom's famous roast. Laughter bubbled up around the room as my relatives exchanged jovial stories, their raucousness contrasting sharply with my internal struggle. I could see my uncle from across the room, dapper in a sharp suit that made him look 10 years younger than his age. He was animatedly sharing plans for the trip to the Maldives, his daughter perched atop the arm of the couch, her excitement radiating. She beamed with pride, blissfully unaware of the cautious glances exchanged between her older cousins and me. Each vivid detail he described felt like a dagger to my gut. The sun-drenched beaches, the luxurious villa, the words dripped with privilege while the reality of his debt loomed heavy behind them. I swallowed hard, recalling our conversation from a few weeks back, the discomfort we'd navigated, and the truth I had dared to share. Eventually, I caught my uncle's eye. His expression shifted instantly. Gone was the carefree demeanor he wore when speaking of the Maldives. Instead, it was replaced with something akin to shame, or perhaps just a flicker of guilt. I hesitated, wondering if I should follow through with this newfound understanding between us, or allow silence to wrap around us like a thick fog. But as the evening wore on, the bravado in his words became harder to listen to. The laughter felt hollow. I clenched my jaw, trying to focus on a game of charades unfolding nearby, but inside, I was seething, a simmering pot about to boil over. Then, as if on cue, the family buzzed around, exchanging placid nods, all oblivious to the storm swirling in my mind. I stood up abruptly, meeting him halfway across the room, and as I did, time felt suspended. I couldn't fully articulate what drove me to speak, but the warmth of his laughter abruptly halted as I reached him. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above the restaurant chatter that reverberated around us. His face paled slightly as he glanced over at my parents, then nodded stiffly. We stepped into the adjacent kitchen, the cacophony of family momentarily muffled behind the door. "About the Maldives," I started, carefully measuring my words, "it's just." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be honest. "I don't understand how you can afford that when you owe me $700. There was a pregnant pause, and I could feel the air thickening between us. His eyes flickered with indignation before his shoulders slumped, exhaustion crumpling his facade. "You're right," he breathed, running a hand through his hair. The honesty in his tone caught me by surprise, a raw admission that echoed back through the familial halls we wandered. In that space, I sensed the weight of secrecy being lifted, if only slightly. As we stood there, the conversation slowly unwound, the debts, the choices he'd made, the regrets he wished he could reclaim. I saw him, not as my uncle who flaunted his apparent wealth, but as a flawed man grappling with his own decisions, navigating the murky waters of his life just as I was navigating mine. Both of us had been on different paths, yet somehow, we arrived at the same crossroads. It was hauntingly familiar. When we exited the kitchen, I felt lighter, as if the dark clouds surrounding us had drifted apart even just a little. In the weeks that followed, my uncle resumed his payments, each one a silent promise that allowed us to rebuild an invisible bridge that spanned the chasm between us. Conversations became more open, and laughter wasn't forced anymore. It returned, gradually, restoring warmth to our gatherings. Eventually, he began to involve me in his plans, allowing me to express my dreams of traveling, not to the Maldives, but to places I yearned to see, and I recognized the transformation. I understood deeply now that confronting the hard truths had not obliterated our relationship, rather, it had reformed its very foundation. As Christmas approached, I found myself wondering more and more about the nature of family, the enduring bonds that tied us to one another, for better and for worse. Something closer to understanding blossomed. Perhaps, in our raw exchanges, we were somehow rediscovering the essence of connection, imperfect yet precious. Then, one cold winter evening, as snow blanketed the streets outside and the warmth of the season settled in our home, I received another tantalizing message from him, one that read simply, "Let's plan a family trip together next year, somewhere we can all go." It felt like an invitation to venture forth into unknown territory, and to that, I found myself wholeheartedly saying yes, feeling the comfort of adventure awaiting us, perhaps captured in the warmth of honesty instead of the weight of pretense. As I read his message, a rush of excitement coursed through me, merging with the ghosts of my earlier uncertainty. The thought of a family trip was exhilarating, like the first breath of fresh air after being inside on a stuffy day. I imagined us laughing together, making new memories, and perhaps even healing some of the rifts that had widened in our conversations. I envisioned sandy beaches and lush landscapes, places where we could leave behind the heaviness of family dynamics and indulge in pure joy, if only for a while. Nestled in the corner of my living room, with the faint smell of pine wafting from our modest Christmas tree, I couldn't suppress a smile. My heart swelled at the thought of reconciliation, of letting go of past grievances and embracing what lay ahead. In the following days leading up to the holidays, our conversations took on a newfound lightness. He opened up about his life in ways I hadn't expected, his struggles at work and the weight of being the family's financial provider. It felt surreal, sharing laughter about his daughter's seemingly endless wish list while in his shadow lay the burden of the previous debts and disappointments we had navigated. I caught myself thinking about how daunting the prospect of taking my family on a shared journey had once seemed, overshadowed by prior confrontations. Yet, here we were, mapping out a future that sparkled with possibilities. As we began planning the trip, each message exchanged felt like stitches weaving the fabric of our connection tighter. We explored myriad destinations, from tropical paradises to mountain retreats. My uncle's daughter chimed in with her ideas, and so too did my siblings, each contributing their wishes and hopes for this journey. There was something wonderfully liberating about immersing ourselves in a collective dream, a shared experience that bound us together through laughter and imagination rather than the weight of expectation or disappointment. The past, with all its burdens, faded into the background for those fleeting moments, and the prospect of adventure glimmered ahead like glistening snow under the winter sun. However, as the planning intensified, I found myself grappling with another wave of emotions. The shadow of my uncle's debt lingered in the back of my mind, creeping in like a winter chill despite the warmth of our newfound camaraderie. Would I be able to fully embrace this trip, carefree and lighthearted, knowing he still owed me? A part of me wanted to push the thought aside, to submerge the nagging feeling in a tidal wave of optimism, while another urged me to confront this lingering discomfort. I reasoned with myself that perhaps this is what forgiveness looked like, the conscious choice to move forward despite unresolved tensions, to embrace joy while still holding space for the healing that needed to occur. The weeks rolled on, and soon enough, the trip was finalized. We had settled on a tropical island with golden beaches and azure waters. As Christmas approached, I felt more connected with my family than I had in years, every message imbued with the fragility and strength of our shared journey. But the night before our departure, while bustling to pack, an unexpected reminder hit me when I stumbled across a handwritten note my uncle had sent long ago, the one where he'd promised to repay the debt. It was a small piece of paper with irregular handwriting, like a phantom drifting through my memories, a promise made during a time when things felt lighter, when the looming shadow of financial stress hadn't yet clouded our interactions. In that moment, all my emotional progress felt attacked. Conflicted by the weight of my own conscience, I decided to send him a simple text, an olive branch submerged in vulnerability. I'm genuinely excited for the trip, but I can't shake the feeling about the debt. He replied instantly, let's discuss it when we're away. I want to enjoy this break with you. Deep down, I appreciated his resolve to prioritize positivity over doubt, yet the flicker of unease within me charged the air like static electricity. As we arrived at the island, every moment was filled with laughter and light, the seashells sharp against our footprints in the sand. My uncle appeared to be genuinely enjoying precious time with his daughter, capturing memories in photographs that would surely warm our hearts in years to come, while I felt the shift within myself, an acceptance of the messiness of family. Yet, the acknowledgement of debts unresolved lingered, almost like a character in its own right, standing just outside the joyous frame of our vacation. I realized then how complicated it is to straddle the line between past pain and present joy, between memories that bind us and those that wound us. On the last evening of our trip, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and lavender, I knew I had to confront my uncle once more, my heart heavy but resolution firm. We strolled along the beach, the waves caressing our ankles, making the moment feel surreal. As the sky faded to twilight, I turned to him, prepared for the delicate balance of honesty and hope I had carried from home. It's been an incredible trip, but we need to talk about some things when we return, I began, about the debt. I want us both to feel free moving forward." He looked at me, eyes reflecting the fading sun, and sighed warmly as he nodded, granting me a sense of relief as the uncertain weight began to lift. Reflecting on it, I realized there might never be a perfect time to confront issues that cling to family dynamics like sea salt in air, and while the elements of debt still hung, our shared joy illuminated so much more. In vulnerability lies freedom. Sometimes, that's where the trips of a lifetime begin.